Hello and welcome back, or if this is your first time, welcome to the NOTCAST. Every few days I sit in front of my mobile phone in my man cave and I talk about a record that I own, or a CD, or a live show, or a film. Today it's number 267 on the seemingly unending list of things I have. As you can notice by looking behind you, I do have a few things. And today I am talking about the fifth studio album, although I think of it really as probably the sixth, by the Nine Inch Nails, released in 2007. That album, and since I don't have it on vinyl, I have been waiting for it to be pressed on vinyl for quite some time, as quite a lot of us have, is Year Zero, as well as the Year Zero remix album, and the singles that went with it, Survivalism, and the less than well known Capital G or Capital G, depending on your point of view. This album, Year Zero by the Nine Inch Nails, has been listed as coming soon in its vinyl repressing on the Nine Inch Nails website for about 7 years, which makes me think that we're probably going to be waiting as long for it as Chinese Democracy, which was a mere 17 years. But apparently patience is a virtue, and if that is the case, then we are all very, very virtuous. Now, about twice a week, sometimes once a week, depending if I'm going to shows or going out or that type of thing, I will sit and talk in front of my mobile phone about these things, and today I've chosen this. My approach, by the way, in case you haven't seen any of these, if you have, great, skip for about 30 seconds, is to talk about an album or a period of time and to go through a band's discography chronologically, although I mispronounced that word, which means, of course, if you're a fan of certain acts that have tailed off dramatically towards the end of their careers, it means that the last few videos are me basically going, this song is shit. I will not be doing that with Nine Inch Nails, by the way. So 16 years ago, 2007, February 2007, Nine Inch Nails continued or started their Year Zero tour in February 2007. Although, strictly speaking, I think it was called Performance 2007. And it was before we knew that there was an album, before we knew that there was a new Nine Inch Nails studio record. There had been some talk. Trent said he'd been in the studio. Nine Inch Nails fans, of course, I am one of them, have been paying close attention to all the little hints and all the little interview things that were going on. And Trent had said he'd recorded some material, and there were some songs that were left over from the previous album with the teeth. And we were like, well, there's some new songs, and maybe we'll get a record out. Who knows? But of course, being a Nine Inch Nails fan, being patient was the watchword. You had to be patient. We'd had a 5-year gap between Downward Spiral and Fragile, 5.5 years. We'd had a 5.5-year gap between the Fragile and With Teeth. And all of a sudden, announced in March 2007, came the next Nine Inch Nails album, a mere 2 years after the previous one. The album was called Year Zero, and the tour had started with the band playing a set of larger European shows following on from the 2005 shows, ostensibly a kind of round two of the With Teeth tour. But the band had started to lay little trails of breadcrumbs of things that were happening first. So, for example, at the first show of the tour, which was in Lisbon in Portugal, somebody, almost definitely somebody in the band or related to the band, left a USB drive in the male toilets of the venue, which, when you fed it into a computer, played a Nine Inch Nails song, and when you fed it into a spectrograph, showed an image at the end. And the band's tour t-shirts had certain letters highlighted, either capitalized or in a different color or something like that. And when you put those together, it created a URL for a website. And there's a huge amount of detective work. Actually, being a Nine Inch Nails fan at this time was absolutely brilliant. It was really exciting. It wasn't just a case of, well, we're going to announce our new album on Instagram with a 30-second clip of a track. And by the way, here's the pre-order for a Super Mega Duper box set. It was a piece of detective work, a lattice work of ideas which had come around it. And Nine Inch Nails had really taken the idea of the album to an extreme. Year Zero was just part of a huge concept which had gone with it. And so, for example, the spectrograph, which appeared on the MP3 of the first track, which I forget what it was, which I think is actually My Violent Heart, according to the crib sheet that I've got along there, features an image of this. This is a hand called the Presence, which is referred to throughout the year zero period. And the Presence, I think it kind of takes its identity from a lyric that's in The Wretched, the line where it feels like God himself was reaching his hand down and pushing you down just to hold you down. That's where this idea came from, and certainly it's not a coincidence. I don't think there is any such thing as a coincidence when it comes to the Year Zero album. The whole concept of Year Zero is, as Trent described it in The Spiral, which was the Nine Inch Nails fan club at the time, he said, for the first time in my life, I wanted to break away from opening up my journal, the forefront of my concerns, and to address the state I'm at now, at the age I'm at now, and to talk about the direction that the country's headed in, the erosion of freedoms, the way we treat the world and our own citizens. This was an outward-facing Nine Inch Nails album. The previous ones had been internal, talking about the emotional barometer of the time and the age of Trent as he was going through it. So obviously, Pretty Hate Machine was about a relationship. Broken was about the fractured elements of self-identity. The Downward Spiral was around somebody stripping themselves down, taking away what they regarded as the superfluous elements of their own life and personality to the core part. And the Fragile was really kind of living with that moment, which is, what do you do when you step off the cliff? I'm reminded of the artist who shredded every single object that they ever owned. And you kind of go, well, at the end of that, there's always something that happens after that. What happens when you kind of walk off into the sunset? What happens at the end of your story? The next day, even though you save the world on Tuesday, you get up and you have breakfast. And most people might not even know that you saved the universe. Year Zero is an album that's outward. It's actually, after you've gone through all of that, you then turn your attentions to what happens outside of your identity. And it was recorded in fits and bursts, including some songs which had been written for With Teeth, and some extra songs as well that had been written during that period, effectively as a bus laptop experiment by Trent. He created a studio. Now that he'd quit drugs, got sober, he had to have something to focus his time on. And if you've got an addictive personality, if you've got the kind of personality that really focuses on something and has to do something, you can't just do like the C-3PO thing in Star Wars and just go, oh, if you don't mind, sir, I'm just going to shut down and go. Right? If you can't do that. If you've got an addictive personality, or you find meaning through activity and repetition and action, and the work itself ascribes some meaning to your existence, then that's probably where you are. And you go, well, I've got to do something. Some people, they're fidgeters. Some people, they make records on a laptop on a tour bus. And this is what Trent was doing, is that he started off with an idea, is he'd start to take some of those songs that he'd written during the With Teeth period and hadn't finished, also some extra songs, starting to put them all together, and recorded bits in soundtracks, sound checks, recorded bits on tour buses, recorded bits, with a home laptop or a setup in a hotel room or something like that. So this was a way of focusing his energy away from hedonism, and it wrapped itself around the narrative, the idea that it was a daydream about the state of the world set in the year 2022. It was about running through the course of events written from the perspective of multiple people in the course of the album. So the album is not by a single narrator. It's almost as if somebody had put a soundtrack to a Netflix miniseries that was never made. And there was some talk about doing a TV show version of Year Zero, which never really came to pass. But as a concept, and an idea, Year Zero would have been an absolutely fascinating kind of experience. As an LP, it's probably, I think, Nine Inch Nails' most obviously post 9/11 LP. Obviously, 9/11, the period before that, I think America had been quite naive and quite innocent, not necessarily innocent, but perhaps had been immune to the consequences of its actions post 9/11. And it was, from my opinion, and I remember I worked in central London on that day, it was looking at all of the major buildings which represented positions of authority and power. So where I worked, overlooking St James's Park, overlooking Buckingham Palace, overlooking the Home Office, number 10 Downing Street, for example, Charing Cross, the city, all of those parts, is looking out that window on that particular day, September the 11th, 2001, looking at every single plane that was in the sky and kind of going, is that too low? Is that plane meant to be there? Should there be a plane there? And where I worked had a degree of security clearance. So, I went in one day, very normal, I think it was a Tuesday, very normal Tuesday, and kind of came out and the streets were full of, tanks and the military, and everybody was paranoid. And there was nothing to do apart from go home and drink. I remember the day of 9/11, and I come with, the world is never going to be the same again. Irrespective of all other things, there was before and there's after. And Year Zero is the first post 9/11 Nine Inch Nails album. I think it's the first album that really kind of reflected a degree of concern about the state of the world, and some of the concepts and the ideas that are inside the album. And lyrically, it's super dense. It's around religion as an idea of exercising power and control and authority and morality, even down to the point that the back cover has a warning from the United States Bureau of Morality, which, bearing in mind, I'm looking at that in my screen, it says it backwards, but it says consuming or spreading this material may be deemed subversive by the United States Bureau of Morality, and if you or someone you know has engaged in subversive acts or thoughts, call this number and be a patriot, be an informer. Inevitably, somebody did ring that number. I don't quite know what the concept was. And then the artwork that we've got there, we've got very clearly somebody holding a Bible. In the other hand, they're holding a machine gun. There's an LP, well, more correctly a CD. There's even a cloth patch, which I don't quite know where I got this one from, actually. And there's also a very kind of detailed booklet, and the idea being that the presence kind of rules over a broken world and acts as a kind of almost like a proof of God. So if you're agnostic or atheist, for example, and you don't think that, or you think, well, I'll believe in a God when I see a God, Year Zero is effectively, the presence is some kind of unexplained object which is saying to you, well, actually there's a power that's beyond humanity, a power that's beyond the individual or the physical, and as I've kind of mentioned previously, I spent a lot of time in a haunted house in the 90s. You have a moment when you're in that house and you come into contact with whatever it was that was there, and you kind of go, this entity, this presence, is so far beyond the power of the physical form, is that I'm effectively almost powerless in the face of it. And you kind of have a sense of almost not humbling, but a new perspective upon the reality in which you're living. Is that, previously you might have thought, well, I'm, a physical being, I can touch things and move things and say things and all that stuff. And then all of a sudden you realise that you're dealing with a power that doesn't have a physical form, and you're kind of going, right, well, I'm clearly way out of my depth here. I can't influence that apart through possibly reason. And the religious parallels inside the album and the associated work are very, very clear. So the Survivalism video makes references to biblical passages: Isaiah 15.9, John 19.34, Exodus 7.21, I think it's Kings 3.22, and another one, let me quickly check, Revelations 18.3.4, I believe. And I haven't read the Bible for a very long time. I read it when I was younger because there was no internet and there was nothing to do. And I'm like, well, if everyone's been talking about it, I might as well find out what it's all about. And the Survivalism video, the first track that was officially released from the album, was released in a number of physical formats. It was a 2-track CD, there was a 3-track CD, there was a 9-inch vinyl release as well, which I don't have. Very clearly there, the Survivalism disc has a gun with a cross on it, but also the cover is, you look at that and you go, those are people that are working as part of the state apparatus, the military end of it. The video for the song is kind of like a broadcast from a number of screens that are surveilling a site. The band are playing in one of the screens, and then these guys, these goons, come in and break up the band and stop them from playing. And it's very clearly a video that addresses the process or the concept of surveillance, of control, of being observed, being watched, and it's, from a conceptual point of view, firstly, totally Pink Floyd when Pink Floyd weren't bitching at each other. Secondly, really, really strong in terms of how it's approaching the facts which it's going into. So year zero, the CD booklet, by the way, this is a real, absolutely essential part of it. So at the time, obviously downloading Napster, etc., had become quite important and quite relevant, and pissed off Metallica. But also people weren't really buying CDs or DVDs. The sales had massively decreased, and so you had sections of reality where people's existence, or the way in which people consume the music, had changed completely. A CD had just become a music delivery system. People were looking at your album as really being basically MP3s in a box that you had to put into a CD player. And so the concept of music as a work of art, a physical package, had started to unravel a little bit. And with year zero, what the band had decided to do was to turn the art itself, the medium of delivery, into a form of art. So this was a tangible, mass-produced work of art that you could touch, that you could feel, that you could open, read, analyse, and all it really required was that extra degree of thought around it, which wasn't always, of course, immediately apparent. But as a release, it kind of was not just your box, your CDs in a box. It was something a little bit more advanced than that. So we had the artwork that sits inside the booklet. There were highlighted letters inside the lyrics that you were able to look out. There were elements of design that were very clearly put there for a reason. And this was, and then there's another touch of the presence there, another photograph of it, alongside what Rob Sheridan, the band's art director at the time, called glitch art. So working on and extrapolating from with T is creating distorted versions of it. So going into the source code of JPEGs, changing individual lyrics or individual words that sit inside it, mucking with the form, and then seeing what comes out as a form of experimentation. We had highlighted letters inside both web pages and T-shirts and things like that, spelled out individual messages. There were white bars that were put over various things, kind of implicating or alluding to forms of censorship, thought crime. We had elements where in fact, if you heated up the CD, it would show you I think a binary code that you could then convert into text, you then convert into a URL and go to a website. One of which was called, I think, external.net. There was one called the Viability Index. There was a whole bunch. There was a web of web pages which had been built up effectively as a maze, which kind of hinted at various versions of what was going on. So there was another version of the truth. There was a website called, and I wrote them all down, and really, where have I put them on the bit of paper here? Hang on, let me just go and check. Yeah, I've got that. So there was web pages, most of which don't exist anymore. One was called extraernal.net. There was the Viability Index, another version of the truth, Operation Swamp 1000, the beginning of the end.org, Art is Resistance, Blood Turns to Water. There was also references to a thing called the Red Horse Vector Virus, which was imaginary. You would go to some of these web pages and they would have MP3s of fake news reports referring to drugs which people were taking, which allowed them to see the presence with their own eyes. There are references to Colombian drug cartels, police murders, authoritarianism. That effectively, Year Zero was an elaborate and beautiful hoax that created an alternate version or an alternate history of the US, very, very similar to 1984 that laid out a potential extrapolation of all the authoritarian elements of American society, which had become clear post 9/11. And so the whole of the album really worked from the position of being almost a warning. And there is, of course, a track called The Warning that is on the album as well. It's absolutely fascinating to go down the rabbit hole, to visit some of those sites and to see which ones do and don't still exist, including, you know, fake MySpace pages or fake web journals that refer to things which don't happen, that were written by different people observing this set of events from different perspectives. And so each of the lyrics on the album are sung from, or possibly slightly different kind of perspectives. So, for example, a track like Capital G or The Vessel, for example, may be sung by different people observing the same set of events on the world stage. It's a wonderful, wonderful waste of time, the whole thing. It's difficult to keep track of it all because of how complicated it all is. But it really is a rabbit hole that's worth investigating. So we had, and at this point, this was being released in conjunction with the band's tour. And the band's tour was represented here as a bootleg CD I picked up around about the time of a recording from the Gasometer in Vienna on the 29th of March 2007. This only features Survivalism. So the band was starting to add songs from the new album into the set list as the songs were released. Survivalism, I think, as I said, was released in March 2007. And the version of Survivalism, this CD, features the tar-dusted mix and an instrumental version of The Greater Good. Now, for those of you that particularly train spotters, there is a slightly different remix, an Opal Heart remix of the tar-dusted version of Survivalism that features a brand new set of vocals and vocal lines from Saul Williams. And he does a fantastic job of contextualizing and adding extra detail into it. Why that mix has really only been available on the UK vinyl single of Survivalism baffles me. It really does. The tar-dusted version that's on the CD is really only scratching the surface. The Opal Heart mix is far more elaborate and has far more lyrics that really kind of open your eyes a little bit to the concepts that are inside the album. But Survivalism as a song is relatively linear. It's relatively small. It's almost one-dimensional, and I think that's deliberate. But at the same point, it's something which is the necessary first step. It's your entrance into the album. Every album's first single is kind of trails what's coming next, and it's kind of like the lock in the door that opens the door and shows you the rest of the album. And Survivalism itself is perhaps a word which could be used to describe the mindset of America, and both in the year zero world and in the real world post 9/11, which is around survivalism. That is your ethos is, I'm going to survive, I'm going to endure, possibly as one of God's chosen people. The slings and arrows of outrageous fortune will be overcome. So there we are. Track one on the album, taking me 23 minutes to get to track one, is Hyperpower. It's a short, punchy, very rhythmic, almost a drum solo actually. But it's built upon kind of like a very repetitive, very pounding drum beat, including towards the end live drums by the band's drummer Josh Freese. It has an idea of, some indeterminate chanting that you can't really make out, a throbbing bass line. The idea of a hyperpower from a political perspective is that of a culturally dominant nation creating a cultural homogeny, and I've mentioned it before. You think about the way in which American culture, and especially English language culture, dominates the world cultural dialogue. You think about, for example, the first time I went to America and I walked down certain alleyways in Chicago, and I was going, I've walked down this alleyway before. I'd seen it in The Matrix. And those kind of things are what happens when you have a hyperpower that dominates the cultural conversation. And the way in which the album is constructed is a warning around the state of where this is going to go. You're going to end up with a very monochrome reality, where you've got a dominant nation that starts to control and limit the amount of dialogue. From a political point of view, there is a concept called the Overton window. And the Overton window is where people is effectively the acceptable political discourse of the time. And so now, for example, in the UK, one of the parts of the acceptable political discourse is the idea that Katie Hopkins says you should be able to machine gun migrants in dinghies. Suella Braverman, who is not the nicest of people, said, well, actually, we should stop people who are coming into the country to claim asylum from doing so. We had a case in October last year where migrants died and drowned in the Thames, and there was a discussion by email between the UK Coast Guard and the French Coast Guard, trying to decide whose responsibility it was to save them from drowning by their ringtones, because the ringtones were either pinging to the French mast, which had a different ringtone to the ones that are pinging to the English mast. And you kind of go, that's where your Overton window has been dragged so far to the right. It's out in the car park having the shit kicked out of it. This is where hyperpower and the logical extension of things like authoritarianism, fascism, and all those type of things lean to. This is a pretty ballsy album, actually, in that respect. And we have a wonderful kind of second track, which is called The Beginning of the End on this. And there's a lot of doom, end of times kind of approach, and a lot of the lyrical approaches to the songs. At the beginning of the end, absolutely banging track, built on a monotonous, straightforward, almost hypnotic beat. It has a build-up and then a breakdown, and then it goes back up to the point where it almost topples over. There is a Ladytron remix, by the way, on the remix album, which is called Year Zero Remix, that was released in December 2007. And the Ladytron remix features the motifs from the downward spiral in there, although replayed and represented that same, like that 5-note motif that works through the album. And then we have track 3, which is Survivalism, which runs obviously the concept of survival as being the triumph and the most important thing, and then the concept of being ready for disruption and being ready for whatever happens next. Hence the US Bureau of Morality here is that you've got people that are now going, well, actually, we're not just dealing with political concepts or actual tangible threats. We're dealing with the idea of ideas, thoughts, concepts, ways of thinking as actually being part of the enemy, which was where the world was going post 9/11. Track 4 is the Good Soldier, which, by the way, is a pretty great song. Really enjoy it, but all of the songs on the album, it feels like, and this is not unintentional, I think, feels very similar to Pink Floyd's The Wall and some of the other albums, where everything is designed almost to be one song in multiple parts, as opposed to separate, individual, discrete songs that are made of their own separate identities that are put together. Year Zero works best as an album consumed as a whole. It's a meal, it's not a snack. And sorry, that's full management speak there. I've gone full Alan Partridge, but it's The Good Soldier, track 4, also draws some lines in from the Downward Spiral. The drum parts are taken from the 2006 re-recorded version of Reptile, which had been performed by 9 Inch Nails and Peter Murphy from Bauhaus in the 2006 radio sessions. Trenton built a new drum part for that track when it was performed live, and that part is then adapted for and used in The Good Soldier. We have track 5, The Vessel, and the lyrics to The Vessel are again pretty dense and pretty exciting, in so much as a song, it's almost around saying, well, actually, the vessel is a vessel of truth. It's a vessel of communication. So the vessel itself is the object which contains whatever the subject matter happens to be. The lyric is about drugs, altered consciousness, about potentially seeing the face of God himself reaching down with his fucking hand, pushing you down just to force you down, that type of thing. And then you kind of go, wow, someone's really put the thought into this record. Drugs are bad, kids, because once you stop taking them, you make albums as good as this. And then we have Me I'm Not, which again, as part of the whole, works perfectly. but as an individual song, it's difficult for me to pick out a section and go, oh, I remember that. That's me, I'm not. Track 7 is Capital G, the second single released from the album, but it wasn't really released as a single. It was released as a 9-inch vinyl release in the UK without a halo number, so collectors feel like they don't have to have it, and also as this a promotional CD single that is backed with the album mix and an edit of Capital G. Now, Capital G is a great song. It has a really astute lyric about, I think it's like, I don't give a shit about the problems that there are in Guatemala. You don't know enough to know what it's all about. It's a lyric which is very clearly about what it regards to be the 4 G's, which is God, greed, i.e. money, George, for George Bush, and greed. All about those. The idea of, you boil it down to a capital G. That's what it is. Is not unintentional. It's pointed, it's sly, and it's a pretty smart political lyric. But obviously it's the kind of political lyric that Roger Waters has made the past 30 years of his career all about, except this doesn't feel like being hit over the head with a reality hammer. The multi-tracks of Capital G, which were published on the DVD portion of Year Zero, remixed by the way, have extra material, extra drum parts, which weren't on the final finished LP version of Year Zero here, in case you're the kind of person who, like me, fed all the multi-tracks into your computer and created a remixed version of the Year Zero album. I should point out, I've remixed the whole of Year Zero last year, and I put it up on my Mixcloud, and hopefully Mixcloud haven't nuked it so you can listen to the album in full. I will post a link down there for you to be able to listen to it. We have track 8, which is My Violent Heart, I believe, and My Violent Heart is the first song that was heard from the album. As I said, it was abandoned as an MP3 on a USB drive in a toilet stall in Portugal, and was, when you put the spectrograph of the MP3 in, you can see that image of the presence had been designed and manipulated into the media itself. Track 9 is The Warning, and I've mentioned The Warning before in terms of a concept. It's a pivotal part of the album's construction and its conceit. And The Warning is a song that originally had been written during the sessions for With Teeth, hadn't been, I think, fully complete. Trent came back, remixed it, and possibly put some extra lyrics in to make it feel more appropriate to fit in with the Year Zero concept, and then put it into the album. We also have track 10, God Given, which, no coincidence that God Given starts with 2 capital G's, does it? Making very, very clear the analogy that we have here around the gun and the Bible, and the symbol that's on the Survivalism CD of the Bible, or the gun that's also a cross there. And God Given, I think, is takes the drum track from a song called Zero Sum, which is the last song on the album, recycles it, rebuilds it, and then puts it into a new context as a new song. It's a perspective of the church, or a perception of the church to the worshippers, is that the good things which happen to you in life, the prosperity, the security, the love, the acceptance, are all part of being something that's God-given from God, and it's rewarding your faith and belief. Now, if you're like me, I'm not religious. I have seen religion in a man-made form to be one of the great evils of the planet, although the idea of spirituality and a concept and a deity is not in itself necessarily a bad thing. As John Lennon said, it's not Jesus, it's his followers, much like certain people in certain toxic band fandoms. You kind of think, okay, so actually, as a song, God Given ties in with the other themes that we've got throughout the rest of the album, and each one of the songs that are on the album approach the series and the circumstances that are set inside the 2022 Year Zero augmented reality as a perspective, and through looking through all of those perspectives, you end up getting a complete picture of the path down which America could tread if it was really unlucky with this album. So song 11 is Meet Your Master. It's no point analysing the lyrics for this. It is a perspective from the people that are the resistance. So in terms of the world that's set inside year zero, 2022, 2023, there is a resistance which says art is resistance, speak up, make your voice heard. And the concept there being that actually art is a way to spread light and illuminate upon the reality upon which you're living in, and art and loving art is an act of rebellion. Now, I'm going to get political. I've done it before. I'm going to do it again. A lot of educational activity is geared towards vocation or employment-based activities. The idea that you should only really do a job if when you get to the end of, you should really only do a qualification so that it can make you more employable in a chosen discipline, which ties in with the idea of people need just enough education to perform, which is a phrase which was used by an authoritarian, totalitarian regime in the 1930s. The idea that art itself is useless unless it creates money. The only thing that matters is beautiful, beautiful profit and money. And, art, culture, resistance, music, books, all those things are meaningless because money is the thing that matters. But ultimately, what is the point of being rich if you have nothing to spend it on? Lockdown showed us all that art and music and films and books and poetry were really bloody important to human sanity. And when people were sat at home all day long at the end of during lockdown, unable to leave their homes, you kind of sit there and go, well, what were we doing? We weren't sitting around counting our money. We were watching television, we were reading books, we were listening to music. We were doing all the things that humans do to make sense of the world around you. And art is one way of shedding light upon the previously shadowy areas of reality. Art can help you change your mind. It can help you see the world in a different way. It can give you comfort and succor, however it's pronounced. When you're lonely, it can provide you with an illumination upon you and your life experiences, and it can help you know that sometimes when you're going through really, really difficult things, is that you are not alone. Other people have felt this, whatever it is they felt, jealousy or anger or envy or heartbreak or love or happiness or whatever else it comes in. And yet, the way that a lot of culture is designed is actually the thing that matters is making money and profit, and art, etc., is useless and dangerous. And you kind of end up going, and that is where the concept of art as resistance comes in. It's where the concept of art is a form of resistance because it addresses and refutes the addressed establishment narrative around things, which is why I think sometimes some governments are absolutely terrified of artists, because artists provide a diversity of thought and opinion and experience, which, if you look at various parts of the world and certain messaging, is not necessarily tolerated. There's only one acceptable way to think about migrants, that they should be machine gunned. There's only one acceptable way to think about people that are unemployed, which is that, they're all scroungers and skivers and when Jeremy Hunt says that we need to release the economically inactive and release their potential. What they're saying is, we want you to go back to work, skivers. How dare you do things that don't make money for your owners and your masters? And the concept then of money being a kind of master and owns you and defines what you can do and how you do it. As long as we live in a capitalist society, there is going to have to be a certain degree of economic reality around that. But art, which is not created with the idea of making profit when it's done well, it's done with the idea of creating communication between fellow human beings and perhaps going, I've thought this about something, and can you feel this about something, or can you think this about something? When you think about things like cultural homogeny and you think about diversity of thought, art is a form of resistance, and the arty types are the ones which people try to look down as being, intellectuals and pretentious and all that bollocks. And it's like, no, actually what you're scared of is people that are different from you. Well, that went down an avenue I wasn't expecting it to go, but here we are. Track 12 is The Greater Good, which, oddly enough, every time I watch that fabulous movie Hot Fuzz, rare opportunities to see it on ITV2 in the UK, it's on quite a lot in the UK. as the phrase, the greater good, the idea of working for something that's bigger than you, that's more selfless than you, the idea of a society or a civilization that is bigger than you as an individual. It's reminiscent, I think, in some ways of the track The Great Collapse, which is on things falling apart, and The New Flesh as well. And it's the idea of being subsumed into something that's bigger than the individual. So, for example, outsourcing areas of your morality or your decision making to tie in with God himself, the capital G. And then we have track 13 is The Great Destroyer. And you can kind of, depending on how cynical you want to be about it, look at the Great Destroyer as being the presence itself. So when people talk about the fear of God, the fear of God, and the idea being, well, actually, if you anger the gods, they could destroy you, or they could do other things, whatever those things might be. And the Great Destroyer is almost that element of, ties in with the idea of revelations, the idea of something coming, the great reckoning that will someday a flood will come and wipe all the dirt from the streets, as Taxi Driver, to paraphrase it, says. The Great Destroyer takes the drum tracks and the rhythm tracks from Every Day is exactly the same, but those beats are distorted and decayed, and they're deconstructed in some way, and it's not unintentional. Track 14, another version of The Truth, by the way, there's a website, another version of The Truth, the idea being around the differing perspectives that you have upon reality. And if you believe in a consensus reality, then the idea being is, well, what happens when you have, because remember, there's facts and there's truth, and they're two very different things. Facts are immovable, provable pieces of information that, as Philip K. Dick said about reality is that which, when you cease to believe in it, does not go away. So where the truth, is more correctly, is an interpretation of those facts. Some people could look at the existence of a shark and go, that is definitive proof of the existence of God. A complex organism that is too complicated to have been designed by random. Other people could look at a shark and go, look, it's all made out of teeth, and all it does is, swim and eat and make baby sharks. There is no way there is a God on the planet as a result of that. And another version of The Truth is a very interesting song that, again, addresses those core concepts that go into it. So there is a section of Morse code in another version of The Truth, which comes in at 3 minutes 33 seconds. And apparently that Morse code reads Grace the Teacher, which was also, by the way, another version of The Truth. An interpolation of that was used to feed into Me I'm Not when played live. Now, there are two songs on the rest of Year Zero. There is In This Twilight, which, by the way, was the final song played live by Nine Inch Nails during their first incarnation, when the band officially split in 2009. In This Twilight was the last song the band played. And then there's Zero Sum, which takes upon effectively a variation of some of the themes that were raised musically in God-Given, taking the drums from that, around the theory of extinction, where nobody wins and where everything of it. So Zero Sum Game is one where, well, to quote, I think, is it Duran Duran? No, Gary Newman. I lose, you lose, everybody loses, nobody wins. I think, which is not unintentional either. I think clearly the parallels with Gary Newman are there too. It is, this period was really, really interesting to be a fan. The band seemed creatively engaged. They were playing phenomenal live shows. Aaron North was on guitar, and fantastic and very underrated guitar player. And the band were really playing their hearts out around this period of time. They rescheduled some shows, so they cancelled a show in Birmingham and said, oh yeah, we're playing at the end of August, which made you immediately think, oh yeah, you're playing the Reading Festival, aren't you? Well, exactly. The band played the Reading Festival, and then they carried on touring. They played, I think, their first shows in Russia and Finland at Provincie Rock, and I think they brought the tour to an end in Honolulu, of all places. But what they did do is not just release the album, is they didn't release many singles. They only released one retail single, being Survivalism. Capital G wasn't released as a retail single. This is a promotional CD where you could get wild reaction sheets now online. And although this was due to be released on the 4th of June 2007, it only got a UK kind of release as I think a 9-inch vinyl release, so it kind of slipped under the radar. Instead, what we had, instead of a bunch of remixes on a bunch of singles, was the album Year Zero remixed. So every song from the album remixed, including a couple which have been on the singles. You also had a DVD, which I believe is here, which you can feed into your computer. And oh no, that's the DVD version, which you feed into your computer, and you have access to WAVs of all of the songs from the album, all the composite multi-tracks, and you can rebuild the song yourself. You have a very kind of esoteric and very brief booklet which just details the track listing there with remixing credits and data points around that, so you can go through it. And you have you have 14 songs from a 16-song album presented in remixed form. Zero Sum and God Given, by the way, remixed by Stephen Morris and Gillian Gilbert from the New Order there. We had remix of Hyperpower called Guns by Computer by Saul Williams. The Saul Williams mix of Survivalism, but without his vocals, is on there as well. And there are some vinyl-only mixes, which I do not have, of, I think, tracks remixed by Sam Fogg of Interpol and a number of other people as well, which are on the double vinyl version of Year Zero remixed. This is a really interesting period to have been a Nine Inch Nails fan, to have experienced that as they were going through it. Now, the idea was the 2007 tour started off as a kind of greatest hits tour, and Year Zero was the last album that was released by Nine Inch Nails under their Interscope contract. And the reason it was the last album released under the Interscope contract was Trent was in a record shop in Australia, and he was thinking about, why are my CDs more expensive? Why are my CDs $34 and other people's $24? And the answer that he got back from the guy that worked at the record company was, we know you have a core audience that is going to buy whatever you put out, so we charge more. True fans will pay whatever we charge. And he thought, well, that's abusive, it's exploitative, it's taking advantage of the fan base, and frankly, I'm worth more than that. So by not re-signing to Interscope but fulfilling his contract, Trent was then in the position of being effectively a free agent who could do whatever he chose to do next. And what he chose to do next is the next Nine Inch Nails episode, but is the rather fabulous period that starts off with Ghosts, which I'm coming to shortly. I think it's fair to say Year Zero is a great record. It's aged very, very well. It's not dated. It seems prescient and forward-thinking, and kind of like thinking about the concept which was built around it. It really was vastly ahead of its time. The idea of a huge web of interrelated kind of websites and ideas and the concepts about an America that was being controlled by a national bureau of morality. The idea of an America that had been enthralled to religion, that had been used as a way of controlling people through moral policing and through ethical panics, and the idea of the concept of a presence that might come and declare God's existence. So if you're an atheist, for example, and you don't believe in God, the hand of God reaching down through the skies to show you that they were real and that they were to be feared, and then all of a sudden all those what ifs as an agnostic suddenly became oh shit. And that was where we were, is literally the fear of God controlling people into doing what other people wanted them to do. I love this album. It's dense, it's intelligent, it's got a heck of a lot of stuff going on underneath it, and it was really ahead of its time. And even now, 16 years after the album came out, living in the times in which the album was meant to be set, is I'm kind of sat there and going, geez, Netflix, you really should have made a mini-series of this. But they didn't. Instead, other things happened. And we are here now thinking about there, but for the grace of God. Look at the world we got into. Although, of course, if you listen to the more conspiracy laden, the more paranoid, or perhaps the more fanciful ideas around the nature and construct of reality, is that you could go, well, actually, we're not actually that far away from it. We went through the pandemic in 2020 that turned all of our lives upside down, that changed a lot of the assumptions that we're making around the reality that we live in, and then going, what is true? What is fact? How many versions of the truth are there out there? But that is something that I think perhaps when we talk about the next album, Ghosts and the Slip, will become more apparent. That period is pretty amazing as well. So that's me on a Wednesday evening spending 50 minutes talking about a 16-year-old CD, which is almost as long as the CD itself. So next time I do one of these, I have a couple of suggestions from viewers and from people in my actual kind of physical meet space out there that I've met in real life, which I'm listening to and I might do in future. But in the meantime, take care of yourselves and each other. Stay beautiful, and I will see you soon. Okay, I'm going to go and eat crisps. What an exciting Wednesday night that is going to be. Adios, amigos. Bye.